Thanks very much, Mark. I'm Greg Vanilo from Virginia Tech and one of the co-organizers of this webinar series. I think I would probably register just to hear the pre-webinar tunes, as I always get entertained. Today's webinar is on composting equipment, and I'd like to say a few words about today's speaker, Lindell Payne. Lindell is a technical sales manager for Ecoverse Industries near Charlotte, North Carolina. He has more than 12 years experience in technical support, sales, consultation for compost operations, specifically with regard to process and equipment recommendations. We've utilized Lindell's expertise in our Mid-Atlantic composting school on numerous occasions, and also the U.S. Composting Council Compost Operators Training Course. He brings a wealth of information, and looking forward to hearing his presentation today. If there are immediate questions along throughout, or immediate answers that need to be imparted during Lindell's presentation, I'll be monitoring those during the Q&A, and I may stop him to answer those immediately. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end of his session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lindell.
Very good. Thank you, Greg. I'm going to now start our presentation. One of the things we'll start off talking about is just the realities of the equipment that is required to do this type of work. If you're at all familiar with composting, you know it's a dirty, moist, abrasive, it's a pretty nasty environment, and it is really hard on all types of equipment. And we need to keep that in mind. We need to remember that it is hard work. Breakdowns and maintenance are to be expected. I had an old man tell me one time at a compost site that his wife had given him a canning jar that was completely empty and sealed airtight. And he took it to work with him at his compost site. 2 weeks later, it was full of compost fines. So if you're familiar with the environment, dust gets everywhere, which makes it really tough. Just some general selection considerations. When we're looking at all types of parts of the equipment, whether it's pre-processed, processed, or post-processed, we want to think about the production. We want to think about, does the piece of equipment that we're looking at has the ability to handle current and future incoming waste stream needs? Because you don't want to purchase a piece of equipment for what you're doing today if you plan on being in business for some number of years. You want to make sure that you've got some headroom for growth. Simplicity of operation and maintenance. How easy is it to operate? How difficult is it to service? Very important, as it's becoming increasingly difficult to find maintenance persons across the U.S. and worldwide. I was in Canada last week, and they were really struggling looking for some good service guys. So it's tough to find good people. Product support. When you look at the piece of equipment, how well a support structure are you going to need for training operators, for training maintenance people, and then what is that support company's capacity to handle parts and service, and quick. Remember quick, because especially if you're composting food waste, biosolids, any high nitrogenous material, you know that you cannot be down for a period of time. Especially if you're in the midst of the 503 regs, you want to make sure that you can meet your time and temperature. So downtime is just an almost impossible thing to tolerate. Durability. How tough is the piece of equipment? What kind of name does it have in the workplace as far as holding up? Is it robust? Relationship with the manufacturer, and I think I can't stress that enough, because everything's built on that relationship. The manufacturer has to understand your business, what it is you're trying to do, what are your goals, what are the things you want to do with your business, where are you going, because that's the only way that they can really step in and help you the way you need to be helped. Price. Everybody talks about price, and price is very important, but it's just it's a component of the overall strategy, just a component. Safety. Is it safe to operate this piece of equipment? How safe is it? Is there a sufficient amount of safety information provided by the manufacturer? I know we had a customer once that he had a piece of equipment, and he said he was talking about safety things, and we were talking about missing guards, and then there was just an overall lack of any kind of training provided by the manufacturer. So it's very important, especially with this type of equipment. This equipment will hurt you or kill you before you can blink your eyes. And so you really have to maintain a good, safe relationship with that piece of equipment. Reliability. You're going to be dependent, like we talked a bit earlier, you're going to be dependent upon this equipment. It's got to be up and running every day. So you want to make sure that you've chosen something that has a good reliability rating. References. Every manufacturer is going to provide you references, but one of the things that you're going to have to keep in mind is that he's never going to give you a reference of a piece of for his piece of equipment of someone who's had problems with that piece of equipment. So with the internet today, you can usually dig under a couple layers. It's like peeling back the layers of the onion and get to the truth of what it is with any piece of equipment. Because like I said, references are important. They're out there. You just have to scratch around, and you got to find the right ones. Then again, reputation. What is the manufacturer's reputation in the industry? Every manufacturer, whether they're selling pencils or paper clips, they all have a reputation. And today, it's very difficult. If you have a bad reputation, it's almost impossible to keep that under wrap because of the last point, word of mouth. The composting marketplace is a pretty small, tight-knit group of individuals all across the U.S., and nothing travels faster than bad news. And that's whether it's on television or if it's at your compost site. So, the reputation of the manufacturer is really important. Material handling. We're going to talk just a little bit about material handling. And if you see in this screen here, how many times are the word transporting used? Quite a lot. And it's because oftentimes in compost sites, you see a lot of idle movement of material. And you need to keep in mind, as you're running your site, every time you touch that piece of that material is costing you money. So you need to be looking at overall strategies to minimize the amount of times you have to touch that material. And here's some basic principles of material handling. Handle it once. Is that possible? Of course not. But I say that to say you need to minimize the amount of times that you handle each piece of equipment. Combine operations. Look at the way your guys do their work and see if there's inefficiencies or monotonous things that you can eliminate in order to make the whole process more efficient. Use gravity if possible. Work with your head, not with your back. How many times have we heard that? Mechanize and automate wherever possible. Let one machine feed another machine. You look at continuous versus batch type scenarios. Now, there's going to be situations that a continuous flow of material will not always work. It doesn't work everywhere. So you have to make that decision based on your needs of your facility. One of the key things to remember is also an efficient layout. I've been to a lot of compost sites in 17 years or so, and very few have actually taken the time to do an efficient flow diagram. So you know where the traffic is, which direction the traffic needs to flow, where does the material go to be moving. And it takes something like that to actually remove bottlenecks, because sometimes you can have what you think is a very efficient operation, but it's really laden with bottlenecks. And once those could be removed, that's money that you can take out of the bottleneck and put it back in your pocket. Another thing too is remove people from hazards. People have a way of getting themselves in dangerous situations all by themselves. So you have to kind of be about 2 steps ahead of your employees sometimes and look for ways to actually keep them away from hazardous situations. As we go through the equipment, we're going to look at some basic categories. We're going to look at pre-processed equipment. Those are things that are used for feedstock preparation. We're going to look at processing equipment. That's the equipment that we're going to use for creating the product. And then we're going to look at post-process equipment, and that is the equipment that's necessary for handling that product after it's been produced. Pre-process. We're going to look at weighing, sizing, mixing, loading, and handling equipment, because all these are things that are necessary in getting that feedstock ready to be put onto the pad so it can be turned into a profitable material. Weigh scales. Weigh scales are very important because that is the way that you measure the amount of material that comes onto your property. I know that if you're a beginning composter, it's an expensive thing to think about, but it's a really check and balance system, because it's almost impossible to site guess. If a guy drives onto your site, he's got a dump truck full of material. It might look like it's just green waste or brush, but he might have stumps or roots or something like that down in the bottom that's covered up that you won't even see until he dumps it onto your facility. So if you've got a scale, you know how much material he's actually bringing on. So you can actually charge him or charge his tipping fee based on the actual amount of material. And conversely then, it will tell you how much material is going off your property. It will tell you if your truck is overloaded before he actually gets out on the street and gets a ticket. So weigh scales are very important. There are two types of scales, pit scales and platform scales. Pit scales are more common. It's like the scale that you see in the top picture here. Platform scales, you see them, but they're just not as frequently used as the pit scales. Another new technology that's come on the market in the last 5 years is a laser scanning. We've got quite a few customers that use these. It is portable or stationary, super fast. The truck driver doesn't even have to stop. He just drives underneath the head or the sensing device here, and it actually measures the truck. It measures the volume of material that he has inside. Then when he's dumped, if he's empty coming on, it measures, because it takes another reading as he goes out. If it's full, it takes the reading coming in. Then it takes his truck reading as he goes out empty. So you know exactly how much material is in there. We got a customer in Texas that installed a system like this in one of their facilities, and they saved almost $250,000 in material over a 1 year period of time. And they realized that they were giving away, that's material that they were giving away, and then also material that they were not charging for when it was coming into the facility. So they took their sales guy out for a big steak dinner, and which is super good thing, huh? Size reduction. We all know about size reduction pieces of equipment. And there are some things to consider, because there are a lot of different size reduction products on the market. You need to think about what your goals are for that equipment. Are you going to use it for volume reduction? Is it a component in your total recycling system? Or is it both? You know, some people may have a grinder that they also go do land clearing, but then they may use it to grind feedstocks also on their facility prior to it going into the windrow. What types of material are you going to be processing with this piece of equipment? How much of it do you need to process? Do you need it to grind up a house in 15 seconds? Or are you just need to keep making enough to do feedstocks? Markets for your end products. You know, if you're going to be using it for mulches and things like that, you probably would use a different sizing product than maybe if you were just, shredding up logs and stumps and things like that. What kind of budget do you have? Of course, none of this equipment is cheap. That's the unfortunate thing about equipment when it comes to composting, is none of it's very cheap, but it's kind of a necessary evil. Market reliability and serviceability, and especially when we're talking about these type grinders. If anybody has a grinder, if you've used a grinder, serviceability is something that's kind of like the nightmare that you live with all the time. Grinder types, I'm sure you're familiar with high-speed, low torque, which are things like tubs, horizontal grinders, and then whole tree chippers, and then slow-speed, high torque, which are shredders. They've really popped onto the market in the last 10 years, the slow-speed shredders. Tub grinders. I usually ask everybody how many has a tub grinder or how many has a horizontal grinder, so you can raise your hand. I can't count it, but you just raise it anyway. Tub grinders, some of the pros, they're high mobility. I mean, you can see tubs today with tracks or tires. Just about see them anywhere on the side of the highway or in the woods somewhere. They're really good for heavy, large diameter materials, things like stumps, root balls, big chunks of wood, because they have a mill down at the bottom. But negative things are things to be thinking about when you're looking at a tub grinder. Safety concerns, throwing. We have a customer here in North Carolina who he had a 18-pound sledgehammer thrown out of a tub grinder that went through a brand new windshield, through the dash, and into the floor pan of a brand new Chevrolet Camaro. So, needless to say, that caused a lot of consternation for him and his facility, which leads you to location. If you know there's a potential for throwing, you have to kind of be careful where you're going to put it. Sometimes with tubs, lengthy or lighter materials are difficult to feed and also difficult to handle. Things like palm fronds, things like that are oftentimes difficult. The only tub grinder fire I ever saw was a guy that was grinding palm fronds. So something else to remember. Oftentimes loading can be tedious because the material can bridge up at the bottom, and you may have to kind of manipulate it around to make sure that you get a constant feed to the mill. High fuel consumption, but that's the same with pretty much all high-speed grinders. They're anywhere from 46 to 60 gallons per hour, and some of them are even higher than that. Here are a couple pictures of a tub grinder. You can see the material actually enters into the hopper here. This hopper rotates, which helps to keep the material moving and so that it's always introduced into the mill at the bottom. This is a picture of a mill, and this also is a picture of a mill. So you can see this is rotating at a very high RPM with these cutters or teeth that are mounted onto the mill. So one of the things that's really a disastrous thing too is when a chunk of metal gets into a tub grinder. We've got another customer that ground pallets for customers, and he wound up with the block of an engine getting into the mill of a tub grinder, and it cost him about $110,000 to rebuild the mill when all that was said and done. So a lot of things to think about. It's a machine that's designed to be destructive. Horizontal grinders. Horizontal grinders, like the tubs, offer a lot of maneuverability features. They have tracks or tires. Little bit safer in that they don't tend to throw things quite as much because you can see they have this horizontal feed conveyor here, which is what this is here. It feeds it into a tamp roller and into the mill here. So it's a little more contained, and it's just a little bit safer as far as throwing goes. A little bit better feed rate control as well, because you have control over the feed conveyor as it goes into the mill. It'll also reverse so that it will not force more material into that mill than it can handle. So that's really helpful if you're grinding large diameter pieces of material. Also, both can be fitted with mulch coloring options. Another thing about a horizontal grinder is that it has a much lower feed height. So you don't necessarily need an excavator or something with a thumb on it to lower it and to be able to watch the material that's going into it. You can actually load it with a loader with a bucket on it. Cons, sometimes they have material diameter limitations because even with the tamp roller, when it's raised up, there's still a finite space here that you can't get anything larger than that into the mill. Like the tub grinder, they like to go to the gas station. They're very, very big consumers of fuel. Here's a couple of other pictures. The material actually rides on the conveyor, goes into the mill grinds it, and goes out. And that material is sized. There are screens that go on the back of this mill, and these tools rotate against this screen, and that's what makes the actual size of the material that you see coming out the back of the conveyor here. And they're all different sizes and configurations, anywhere from 2 or so inches up to 8 or 10 inches, depending on what you're going to be grinding. And again, depending on what you're going to be doing with this material. Sometimes it's better to have a little bit coarser if you're going to be composting. And if you've got some really nasty stuff, sometimes it's better to do a little bit coarser grind, because that gives you a little better particle space for your windrow. Chippers. We see a lot of chippers today, especially with the boiler fuel market, because chippers will make a really nice consistent product. And that's what the boiler fuel guys are looking for. They want a chip that's consistent because they can get the most BTUs out of something that's consistent, out of a consistent chip. And a good chipper oftentimes will save a lot of money, because sometimes guys that make chips out of horizontal or tubs wind up having to screen the fines out of them before the fuel guy wants to get them, because you can't handle a lot of fines inside that feedstock. So we see a lot of these. They come both PTO and self-powered. Safer because there's not really any throwing much that occurs with these. They're designed to handle long material. Some of these you can actually feed an entire tree into. Like I said, it's a consistent product. The cons is most require an additional piece of equipment unless it is a standalone unit. Here's some pictures here. You see they just feed the entire tree in, and you get this really nice, pretty chip that can go directly to a fuel manufacturer. This one also, this one's a PTO model here. So it has to hook to either a really high horsepower tractor, or they make some trucks now that have PTOs that are just designed to use with chippers. This also is a big Moorbark chipper here. Slow speed, high torque. These, like I said, have come on the market within the last 10 years or so. Really good fuel economy, less stress on the engine, a little less maintenance, because the drums typically rotate around 30 RPM compared to hundreds of RPMs with a high-speed grinder. It's more of a shearing action. These things are really good for first passes. So if you've got stumps, roots, logs, logs and things like that, super good for that, because it'll break it down. The particle size that comes out is not consistent, and it's not small oftentimes, but yet with that, it will give you the ability to handle a variety of products, everything from green waste to tires to white goods. You can just about put anything in here. Anything that you can grind, you can almost put in a slow-speed shredder. Super good for bulking material, good for C&D. It's just a good general all-around piece of equipment as like a primary grind type piece of equipment. They are expensive. They are slower. In other words, it's not going to be grinding 1,000 yards an hour or anything like that. But if you do get if you get a chunk of steel in these things, they're designed to handle that chunk of steel. So it would probably have no damage to one of these slow-speed shredders, where you might have $1,000 worth of damage to a high-speed grinder. And you do have a little less control over particle size, just because they don't have those screen grates or baskets that go down there that would control that particle size. Here, a picture of some of the slow-speed shredders that are on the market today. Differing sizes. Oftentimes, the size numbers that you see are a designation of the diameter and the length of the shaft that's inside. There are multi-shafts, single shafts. That depends on the manufacturer. They all have you can ask them all, and they'll all have a good story about why theirs is best. But that's why it's important to go back and talk to people that use them, and what types of feedstocks they use them on. And that will help you to put your picture together of what you really would like to have. Size reduction, food waste specific. There's an ever increasing demand for ways to handle food waste. You know, we're seeing a lot of regulations all across the U.S. And these are, we're going to show you a few slides and talk just a little bit about some materials that are designed specifically for food waste and for beverage destruction, in that they will remove the organic fractions from the wrapping, the plastics, the papers, the things like that. And they produce either a slurry or a cake. So in other words, you can take the food waste, it will depackage it. You can use it then for a slurry for an AD plant, or you can use a cake for if you want to stack it or mix it in with your composting mixture. Like I said, used for composting or AD. Beverage destruction. We have quite a few customers that use these, that just their sole purpose in life is to open up cans of out of date beer or soda or things like that. And they're always stationary electric. And they're oftentimes mounted within, they'll have other feed conveyors and hoppers and things like that. Here are two of the more prominent ones that are on the market. The Scott's is on the left. There's a Tiger. Both of them do a good job. Both of them can provide this slurry or the cake. I've watched both of them run. The Tiger, it seems that it has a contamination rate of about 98% clean product. So, if you're going to be taking that finished material and putting it in compost, a 2 or 3 or 5% contamination of that organic material is not that important. But if you're going to use it in animal feed or something like that, you don't want to feed your pigs plastic. That's not good for their bacon. So you want that stuff to be as clean as it can be. Mixing equipment, and I put a couple slides of mixing equipment because some people use mixers to mix their feedstocks with. If you've been paying close attention to the guys ahead of me, you know how important it is to have a good homogeneous mixture of materials in the Windrow or in your composting, whether it's an ASP or Windrow, either one. So there are different types of mixers: mobile mixers, stationary. There are vertical shafts and horizontal shaft mixers. They come powered with PTO. So the smaller ones, they can pull them behind a tractor. They have a PTO drive. Diesel powered for the standalone guys, and then electric ones as well. They will give you consistent mixtures, and oftentimes they include load cells. So you can actually measure all of your feedstocks and put them in there, and you know exactly when that batch comes out that it has the right amount of carbon, the right amount of nitrogen, and that it's properly mixed when it goes out onto your pad. Here are some mixers of differing types. A lot of different manufacturers in the US and in Europe. Mobile mixers, they could also be used for material transport. Like you see this one here, we've got quite a few customers that will actually, there's my mouse, that will actually, they dump everything in, they mix it, and they go out and they build their windrows with the actual mixer itself, which is pretty handy. PTO tractor driven, the smaller ones like this, and then larger ones that actually mount onto a truck. Some stationary mixers. This is a diesel powered one here. These two are electric powered. And this is a compost site that was up above Raleigh, North Carolina. The customer there would he actually mix everything inside here. He would back a roll-off truck up to here. Material goes into the truck. He takes it out, uses that truck to form his windrows now. So they're heavy duty, large capacity. Like I said, diesel or electric powered. They're really flexible. There's quite a few of them on the market today, more than I think ever before. Loaders, probably don't need to talk about loaders because I'm sure if we talk about how many people have a loader, I'm sure everybody would stick their hand up. I don't have one, but I'd like to have one because you just never know what you might do with one of them. But in this type of environment, you use them for a lot of things like forming up windrows. Some people use them to turn their rows when they're getting started, for mixing or batching, loading trucks, of course, loading screens, and for just general moving materials around the site. Things to think about and to look at as far as options when you're looking at a loader. Light material buckets. Oftentimes, composters will use what's called a light material bucket, and it's designed to handle compost or wood chips or things that are not quite as dense or have the same bulk density as dirt would have, or rocks or things like that. High tip buckets are super helpful for loading trucks. Oftentimes, if you have a loader with a high tip bucket, you will not have to build a loading ramp or something like that to load trucks, which makes it really more efficient. You can also get grapples and booms, which help you to move other things around your site. So it just adds to the flexibility of a loader. Loaders with quick attach with a couple of these different attachments, you can save yourself from having, a couple extra loaders sitting around with different fixed buckets on them. Also, when we're looking at material handling, size does matter, but so does cost. It really depends on what your application is, how much material you're going to be needing to move, and then what your budget is. You can see the little guy with the tractor probably wouldn't have any need for a bucket that you could stand up and play cards in. Processing equipment. We're going to talk about turners, moisture addition equipment, windrow covers, and monitoring equipment, because these are all pieces of equipment or things that you use to actually process your feedstocks into compost. Turner. Why would you need a compost turner? And there's some things to think about for turning. To introduce oxygen, for homogenization. Many customers actually use a turner to mix their feedstocks so that they don't need a mixer. They could actually do it with their turner. To break down odor-causing anaerobic clumps. Oftentimes, material that's turned with a wheel loader will have clumps that will form during the composting process. And those need to be broken up and homogenized to prevent anaerobic odors from occurring. Temperature management, you can help use a turner to help monitor your pile temperatures, and you could turn at various times to help control those temperatures. And also you can use them to introduce moisture. Most turners have devices that actually introduce moisture into the turned material during the turning process. So it kind of puts moisture where it's needed at the windrow core, not running off the side, creating a stormwater or leachate retention problem for you. Things to think about when you're looking at a compost turner. What is the material composition? What is it that you're going to be turning? Is it biosolids? Is it DAF sludge? Is it paper sludge? Is it green waste? What is it? And by that I mean, how heavy is it? How dense is it? How much of it are you going to be turning? You're going to be doing 30,000 yards a year, or are you going to be doing 330,000 yards a year? Because all those things are considerations that you need to think about. Material flow, very important. Pad conditions. What type of pad do you have? Do you have a supported pad? Do you have a paved pad? Or do you have a pasture outback that you're going to be using? All those, that's very important, because that has a bearing on the type and configuration of the turner that you'd be looking for. Pad layout, utilization. How do you want your rows on your pad? How much utilization do you want of that? Do you have requirements by your permit? Because some states require specific spaces between windrows. Others require none at all. Windrow size. Machine considerations, things to think about from a costing standpoint is, what's the total cost to operate? We think about a piece of equipment. If you start looking at a turner or something that costs $200,000 or $300,000, but it's not just the sticker. It's also, what does it cost day to day to operate that? What is your fuel consumption? What does it cost you per cubic yard of material turned? And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, probably with just about every piece of equipment we talk about, because in order to really know the efficiency of your operation, you've got to know what it's costing you for every cubic yard of material you grind or you turn or you shred. That's the only way that you can really determine the efficiency of your operation. You need to think about availability of optional equipment. Is it just a piece of metal with a couple wheels on it and a drum, or are there other options that you could put on there? So if you change your process, that you can kind of change your turner to match your needs. Market reliability, we've talked about that for other pieces of equipment. Serviceability is very important. And that's something I see every day with new grinders, with new turners, with new everything. They become more and more high tech. There's more computers, there's more widgets and snidgets and buttons. And so serviceability becomes an ever increasing consideration, because, if you've got Grandpa Sam that's been working on loaders for 40 years, sometimes it's kind of hard for him to handle a new, like if you got a CAN bus system or something like that. So it's just something that you need to really keep in mind when you're making a decision on a turner or any other piece of equipment. Turner types, they're pull or tow behinds, trapezoidal turners, self-propelled. We're going to look at available options, and then walled and tunnel systems. Everybody's probably seen, many people have probably pulled a tow behind turner. Most composters that get started, they start with something like either one of these. Pros, they are PTO or self-propelled, because most people that get into composting have got a tractor sitting around somewhere. They have minimal moving parts. They're really good for small-scale composting or for startup operations, and they have a much lower cost to purchase. So you can kind of get into the market with one of these without a huge investment, especially if you're a farmer and you've got a tractor sitting around somewhere. Then chances are it's going to work really well with a tow behind. All it has to have is either a hydrostatic transmission or a granny gear. Not to be sexist, but it's a granny gear. So, and cons, they do require a tow vehicle. So even if you don't have a tractor and you decide you want to start with one of these, then you still have to go get a tractor. So the throughputs are oftentimes lower as well. And one of the things as far as utilization of the pad that you have to keep in mind is that access aisles are required for the tow vehicle. So as you can see, the guy in the top picture, there could be a row of material where that tractor is, but he has to leave every 2 rows a tractor's worth of material so that he can actually drive that tractor up and down. So it's just a little bit less efficient. Your pad utilization is just a little less efficient because you've got empty space there. And one of the things that can become a problem for you as well is that where there is an empty space, water likes to collect. So you don't want to get in any trouble with regulators because you might have puddles of uncontrolled water sitting there, because they will, in the summertime, oftentimes become odorous. So it's just a little bit more efficient to use a non-tow behind turner. But, we all start with where we start, and that is what it is. So here are some pictures of tow behinds. Quite a few manufacturers here in the U.S. Some are powered, like this one in the center. Has a nice John Deere engine sitting up here. But the majority of them are power takeoff, PTO off a tractor. Trapezoidal turners. There's really been a kind of a change in the market with trapezoidal turners in the last couple of years. I had this nice slide prepared with 2 other manufacturers on it, and neither of those 2 manufacturers now build trapezoidal turners anymore. So I had to take those off and add another slide of this one on there. Trapezoidal pros, they're most of the time tow behind, the one that's on the market now. And what they do is they actually will eat the face of the windrow, of the pile, or the trapezoidal pile. They just sort of eat the face off. You can see here, this machine has spinning rotors inside that actually carve that face off. See, it's nice and square where this machine's been, and it transposes it over to the side. So the cons for this is, if you're using a big, large block of material, it's kind of hard for air to get in the very, where's my little mousey? In the very center of this huge pile, how much air do you think there is there? Not a lot probably residing there. So, that often leads to more turning frequency to be able to oxygenate the material properly. And it is a little slower turnover process than like windrow composting or something like that. Self-propelled turners. Some of the pros, they're available on tracks and tires. Space requirements between windrows vary by manufacturer and configuration. You get a bit more air because not only do you get air during turning, you also get the chimney effect. I'm sure you guys have talked about the chimney effect of a windrow. So you get that chimney effect as well, that natural convection. And you can turn a row with one pass. You don't have to make multiple passes to turn an entire windrow. Some of the options that you can get will allow you to put moisture inside that material during turning, which will give you greater process control and greater flexibility. But conversely, they're expensive. If you start looking at a self-propelled turner, they're anywhere from $300,000 or so up to $1 million, depending on how big it is, what it does, the bells, the whistles, all those type things. Here are some pictures of self-propelled windrow turners that are on the market today. Different manufacturers. There are a couple European, and then the rest of them are pretty much made here in the U.S. Options for windrow turners. You can see here a side transposing conveyor, which we're starting to see more and more call for these. It actually laterally moves a windrow every time it's turned. So this allows a composter to construct his pad just like a manufacturing facility. He has his row furthest from his fixed screen position would always be his fresh row, or his greenest row. And then every time he moves it, it transposes that one step closer until where he has a fixed screen. So that means that the row he's screening is always the closest row to his screen. So he's not running loaders around all over the place just hauling material. It's that efficiency, it's that material movement that we're talking about. So we're seeing that a lot. Tarp coverings, a lot of semi-permeable, that's a nice one to say, tarps, whereby they help with odor, they help with moisture retention on a really dry climate. And if it's a wet, they can also shed that water and help keep some of the water outside of the material. And then elevating cabins. These drop down, allowing the operator to load it right directly side loaded onto an RGN type trailer. So makes it moving very easy. We've got quite a few customers out in Nebraska and in Idaho. They may move a turner 3 or 4 times a week to different feedlots and do composting. Walled, tunneled, or oftentimes called agitated bays. This is another turning, a type of turning. You see this a lot inside some municipal facilities. I think this is actually at the city of Goldsboro, North Carolina here. They're all, well, not always, they're indoor or outdoor. Reduced odors and emissions because they're always contained indoors. Fully automatic. These things run on an operating system that tells them which bay to go to, when to turn it. So there's a control system that monitors the oxygen and monitors the temperature and the moisture so that it's always has the optimal conditions within that material for composting. And they're diesel electric. Cons are they're typically part of a complete system, and they are very expensive to purchase because that whole system is very expensive. We don't see very many of these type systems that are not in the municipal realm because of the cost. You're talking about the building, the air handling to remove the air, also the process air that pumps up through the material. So very, very expensive. Moisture addition, we talked a bit earlier. I'm sure you've, in your earlier presenters, have talked about the importance of keeping proper moisture inside the windrow. And it's the best way to do that is during turning, because it actually puts the material directly inside the material at the core where it needs to be, where the majority of the microbes are, instead of just spraying water on the outside and letting it run down the sides and collect and become a problem for you at another time. But there are tanks. There's a manufacturer that has a pull behind tank here, works really well. Hydrant systems that connect to a hydrant and then connect to a turner. So there's a lot of different options for that. A lot of different options. So it depends on your feedstock quantity, how many rows, how big your rows are, how long your rows are. All those are considerations when you're thinking about moisture addition. Covers, we talked about covers for turners, but covers also are like a standalone unit itself. You don't have to use it with a turner. Some people use covers to cover food waste compost for vector reduction. So heat retention, we talked about, moisture, stormwater runoff management, and vector control. I'm sure everybody knows what a vector is. We got some of them in the woods behind my house. Monitoring equipment, probes, temperature probes. There are digital and analog, oxygen and carbon dioxide probes, data logging, and thermocoupler. Temperature probes. There are a bunch of these on the market. RioTemp sells a lot of different styles. Some have data logging capabilities, some don't. This is a company called Windrow Manager here. They actually log, they measure temperature, moisture, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, and log all that for each windrow. And then this is a temperature and an O2 meter as well, all built into one. So there's been a lot of sophistication with this type of equipment in the last couple years. Some of it is really good. Some of it works marginally well. So before I bought one, I would definitely talk to somebody that uses it daily. Don't just let the sales guy drop one off and you buy it, because you may get yourself in some trouble. Oxygen, carbon dioxide probes, again, analog, digital, and data logging. There are different types. You probably have used this type. If you went to any of the USCC 40-hour operator classes, we use these in that class to check O2. Digital here. This one's digital as well. Monitoring equipment. There are quite a few different windrow management programs out there, and I think they're really handy because they help keep the regulators happy. You input the data. Some of them require manual input. Some of them, like this Windrow Manager, actually inputs the data directly into a spreadsheet, so you can print all of the things out that you need to give the regulator, and it makes him understand that you're really on top of all of your temperature and you're monitoring all your windrows. It helps reduce production costs, increase throughput, and improve your product quality, because if you've got this type thing, you know exactly that your temperatures are taken every day. And that becomes a tedious task sometimes, especially if it's a rainy day, or, you know, I was at a compost site one day and it was in the wintertime and it was cold outside, and I saw this guy sitting in a golf cart down close to the end of one of the windrows, and I walked down to where he was, and he was asleep. And I asked him, I said, man, what in the world are you doing? He said, oh, I'm taking temperatures. And I said, well, okay. Well, what are you getting on this windrow here? He said, oh, it looks just about the same temperature it was yesterday. I think I'll go with that. And I think there's a lot of that happens. So if you have something like this, it will help kind of help keep you honest. Screening. So screening is a post-process piece of equipment. I don't know how many people have screens or if you screen your material, but most compost that is produced has to be screened in order to give your customers the type or the fraction of material that they would like. Things to think about when you're looking at a screen. What types or composition of the material is it that needs to be screened? Is it going to be biosolids compost? If it's biosolids compost, it's going to possibly have a little bit of a sticky or tackiness to it. So you need to decide what kind of screen you want to use there, whether it be a trommel or a star. Quantity of material to be screened. How much is it do I want to screen? What are my fractional or my fine sizes? How many fines do I want to produce? How many fractions at one time? There are 2 fraction screens and 3 fraction screens and 4 fraction screens. So, it's kind of nice to be able to dump a bucket of material into a hopper of a piece of equipment and get all of your screening done at one time in a single pass. Screening plan. Do you want to take the screen to the material or the material to the screen? There are advantages of both. Moisture level of the material. How wet is my material going to be? Now, I know there's always rainy days, but if you generally speaking, is your material wet? Is it sticky? Is it dry? Mobility requirements. Do I need to move it? Is this the only place I'm going to be using the screen, or am I going to have to take it to other locations? Fuel consumption. And with fuel consumption, again, is that what's my cost of cubic yard of material to screen? What does it cost me to screen a cubic yard of material? Something that you really need to know. Market reliability and serviceability. We've talked about the importance of both of those things. Different types of screens we're going to look at today. We're going to look at shaker screens, trommel screens, and star screens. Excuse me 1 second. Shaker screens. How does a shaker deck work? If you've been around aggregates at all, you've seen a shaker screen working. Materials batch loaded into a hopper. It's fed onto a flat deck, or it could be a bouncing deck of a certain size. The fine material will bounce and move through the first or coarser layer onto the fines. The fines then will flow through here. So you've got 3 product sizes out of one piece of equipment. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind with a screen like this is oftentimes as the moisture content increases, the throughput of this screen typically decreases because this is a fixed screen. Now, some of the manufacturers have installed bouncing balls and things under the bottom of them to keep that material knocked out of those screen holes. But generally speaking, higher moisture equals lower production. Here are some pictures of some shaker screens, different types, different sizes. Noisy, in a word, because you've got a lot of vibrating, moving things going on there. Like we talked about earlier, they're mobile or stationary. Almost all the equipment that you see today is mobile or stationary when it comes to screening. Tractor tires on the mobility versions, a little less expensive to purchase than some of the others because, you've got essentially a screen box here and a lot of conveyors. Cons, they can clog with wet material. Production typically decreases as moisture increases, as we talked about. Noisy, and then there's quite a few moving parts. Trommel screens. Probably everybody that's worked on a compost site or had a compost site has had or does have a trommel screen. but the trommel screen operates under the principle that material from a hopper is fed into a rotating drum. That rotating drum typically has a fixed opening, a screen panel or a wire with a fixed opening, like we see here. As these rotate, as that material moves forward, then the fine particles that will fall through those squares or those holes drop out onto a conveyor and are carried away. They're typically easy to change the drums. Back in the old days, it might take 3 or 4 days to actually change one of these drums because you had to unhook chains and bells and gears and cogs and everything else to get it out. But the manufacturers today have done a lot of really nice stuff, making these things very flexible. You can pop these drums out in half an hour or so, put another one in, which allows you to do different sizes of material. And then some of them also, as you see in this picture here, have different sizes of screen material on the same drum, which would allow you to screen multiple size material in a single pass. Here are some different trommel screens, different sizes, different configurations, everything from flat decks. Typically, the European screens started with what they called a flat deck trommel because the material was, the trommel itself, like you see here, was flat with a corkscrew in the center. And that kept that material always riding and in contact with the actual screen itself. A lot of the US type have lifting bars inside, and what will happen is if you have stick or prickly material, as it lifts that material up, those sticks can become oriented in such a fashion that they come back down and go through the wire here. So sometimes these European ones are just a little bit cleaner material than some of the others. Trommel Screen Pros, again, mobile or stationary, tracks or tires. We are seeing the majority of the ones today are clamoring towards tracks just so they can take it anywhere. You know, us Americans, we like our tracks because we feel like we're invincible if we got something built on a set of tracks. Cleaning brushes, which is this brush here. This brush helps to keep that drum clean when you're screening wet material because the fingers of the screens actually poke into the holes of this drum, keeping it completely clean. Very simple to operate, good production, and a good clean product. They're used everywhere. I mean, everybody uses them for screening everything from dirt to topsoil to compost to wood chips. Cons being that to change your fractional size, you have to change your drum. So if you want to go from a 3/8 product to a 5/8 product, you got to have 2 drums. So drums are typically anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000, depending on who the manufacturer is. And again, like with the shaker screen, as moisture increases, production typically decreases. Star screens. A star screen works kind of like our little picture here. This is a hopper. The material is fed onto a bed of rotating stars. Those stars are set with a fraction, with an opening such that will allow your fines material to actually pass through the stars. The overburden material then bounces off the end. The size is based on the sizing here and the distance between the stars and the thickness of each of these star fingers. Here are a couple pictures of star screens that are on the market today, differing manufacturers. This is kind of an interesting piece here because this is actually a star screen insert that fits where a trommel drum is normally installed. So in other words, if a customer has wet, sticky material, he can pop his drum out, put the trommel insert inside. I mean, the star screen insert inside is screened as a star screen. And then if he wants to do a really pretty finished screen, then he can put his trommel back inside. Star Screen Pros, again, like all of our other equipment, they're tracks wheels or tracks wheels built together. Difference between this and the trommels or the others is that you can vary your fine size based on changing the star rotation speed. So with the star deck, this is a bed of the stars. The material comes onto this. The faster the stars are rotating, the finer the fraction of material that comes out into your fines. So if you're screening at 5/16 and you want to make it 3/8 or 7/16, something like that, you can slow down the rotation of your stars, and that lets coarser material fall down through the screen deck. These are really good for high moisture materials because as that material moves and bounces across this deck, it tends to open it up, allowing the yield, your fines yield, to go up higher. It doesn't just stay stuck together like it would inside possibly the drum of a trommel. So you've got really high production with a star screen, but you got a lot of moving parts. Every star shaft has 2 bearings and a chain on the end. So that means you've got a lot. Most of them come with auto lube systems to keep those bearings greased properly, but you got a lot of moving parts to be thinking about. Plastic removal. I think plastic is probably the scourge to the compost individual. It's almost impossible to go to a compost site and not see a bunch of stupid plastic. It is everywhere. And so these are machines that are used to remove plastic after the material has been processed. They all use some sort of pneumatics to remove it. Everything from sitting on the back of a star screen to being fed through to remove stones and then also plastic to these units that sit just on the discharge of a trommel here. So, about the only way to really truly control plastic is on the front end of the process. You need to get it out before it gets in there. And then you don't need this type stuff. But it is good to know that this type of equipment exists so that it can help you clean your material up, because Aunt Susie surely doesn't want to find any plastic slivers in the material she's putting around her petunias, for sure. Bagging equipment, mobile and stationary. I put these in there just because you need to be aware that there is material, equipment, lower cost solutions out there for bagging. But you need to remember that bagging is very labor intensive. Typical production of these smaller units is anywhere from 200 to 600 bags an hour, and that depends on your labor. If your guys are gung-ho guys, you can probably get the 600. If they're just average type dudes, you probably get 100 maybe. But there is always a market for bagging at any size type producer. And that's what I have. That's the end of our presentation.
Great. So thank you so much, Lindell. And we're going to look through, see if our registrants have any questions that they want to run your way. In the meantime, I'll ask if Mark can put the URL for the Qualtrics survey in the chat board, and I'd appreciate it, anybody who's on today to fill that out. It helps us figure out how to improve these in the future. Again, as we're waiting to see if anybody's got any questions, let me ask you one that I suspect some people have. With this equipment, we talk a lot about the cost. And when I talk to new composters or people considering getting into the business, they're always asking me for less expensive alternatives, or where one can get some used equipment that might be less expensive. I'm wondering if you could address the availability of used versus new equipment and what one might have to worry about, and how much the price changes as a piece of equipment wears out.
Certainly.
And Lindell, before you do that, if you could stop, if you don't mind, why don't you stop sharing your screen? That way we're not looking at a blank screen.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right, so you can answer that question now, Lindell.
Yeah, no worries. Well, there's a plethora of companies out there that sell used equipment. Everything from grinders to shredders to screens to turners. Typically, a piece of used equipment could be anywhere from a half to even as much as a third the cost of a new piece of equipment. But one of the things that you have to be careful with used equipment is that oftentimes they come with no warranty, which means that if you're going to purchase a used piece of equipment, you've got to do a lot of homework. You've got to do a lot of work up front. You need to go look at that piece of equipment. You need to take your mechanic with you. You need to run it. You need to look for things that could be telltale signs of problems, oil leaks, bearing leaks, places where bearings might have scalded before, bound up, things like that. So it's considerably, I would say typically around half to maybe even the third the cost of a new piece of equipment as far as the cost of it goes. Productivity, it's going to be almost as much as a new piece of equipment. But I think that your maintenance costs will, of course, be more with a used piece of equipment because you've got a piece of equipment that's kind of got the good worn out of it sometimes. Oftentimes, they trade it in because they're getting a new piece of equipment or they're going out of business or something like that. If it's that case, it's good. But if it's a situation where they're where they've had problems too, you just need to do a lot of good investigating. You need to put your detective badge on before you start going off to buy a piece of used equipment. I mean, we sell quite a bit of used stuff, but I tell everybody just to really do your homework. If you've got a good mechanic, if you have a mechanic at your site, you guys both go crawl all over it. And I would try to press the person doing the selling into some sort of warranty, even if it's just 3 months, because that way usually these things will pop up. If there are problems, they'll typically pop up pretty quickly especially if it's been sitting for a while. So not sure if that's I hope that answers your question. It doesn't beat around the bush too much.
No, that was very helpful. I also guess that there's some online sites, maybe similar to when we're looking for a restaurant and we use Yelp. There might be some places online where someone could get some information about composting equipment.
Sure, I would look at some of the sites. They're Grinder Crusher Screen. They sell a lot of used equipment. They're out of Smyrna, Georgia. Apollo Equipment. Earthsaver Equipment. There are a complete listing of different companies, and they're all pretty good because when you're selling used equipment, you have to have a really good name in the market if you're going to survive. If you sell junk, you're going to get a really bad reputation, and you're probably going to be out of business before long in the used equipment market. So I think it's easy to find used equipment. It's out there. Like I said, just if you go down that path, spend the money and do the homework, do the investigation to make sure that you don't get yourself in trouble down the road.
All right. So I haven't seen any other questions come in. My guess is some of the people may be still mulling over much of what you've said today and may have questions in the future, and we'll of course provide that information about how they can contact you to learn more about what to look for in equipment. I want to let everybody know that we'll like to get a PDF of your PowerPoint. If it's not already online, we'll link it to the website. The recording of this presentation in a couple weeks will also be online. And I'll be sending a reminder in a couple weeks also for our next composting series webinar, which will be on composting management of water and problematic feedstocks. So with that, I guess we can come to an end today. and we'll turn it maybe back over to Mark and say goodbye to everybody.
Yep, I think you covered it all, Greg. Again, as Greg mentioned, I put a link in chat to the Learn event. You probably got there. You probably know where that's at because you're here now. But feel free to share that with colleagues or friends who were not able to be here. Laura, you mentioned in chat, ask about the slides at that same Learn event. The link that I put in chat, that Learn event, in addition to the recording, copy of the slides will also be available there. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so I think that's it. Lindell, thanks again for your time.
No problem. Glad to do it. If I could help anybody, just let me know.
Thanks, folks.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Hey.